All right. So welcome. It is Tuesday, 7:39 p.m. You are back on Pump Up the Volume. I'm Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz. As many of you know, I am a doctor, a medical doctor, a tech entrepreneur, and someone who is used to challenging the establishment and status quo, and really, with this show, focused on amplifying the voices of communities and really trying to share insights with our audiences regarding some of the happenings around the state, especially in a time where we are still confronting COVID-19 and many social justice challenges and issues. And so, as always on the show, I don't want to necessarily focus so much on my background as much as the people that are with me, right? And so, want to again reintroduce my co-host today, Roberto Gonzalez, Executive Director of Steambox Rhode Island, an advocate for youth in the city of Providence and throughout the state of Rhode Island. Mr. Bill Bartholomew, as you all know from the Bartholomew Town podcast, as well as Mr. Pat Ford, founder of the Libertarian Party and of the Coalition Radio Network. Both are not present today. Pat is out there collecting signatures for presidential petition or for one of the presidential candidates. And Bill is out there in Newport doing, as always, gaining more information and news to bring back to us next week. But we have a very special guest today, and I'm grateful that she is with us. So I'd like to introduce Mrs. Shondell Burney Speaks, Senior Advisor to Mayor Lorza in the city of Providence. And Shondell has been gracious enough to share her time with us today. And so really looking forward to really opening up the discussion with Shondell, kind of describing more about her background, the great work that she does in the city of Providence. And then we'll kind of move on from there. So Shondell, welcome to the show. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And please let our listeners, or tell our listeners a bit more about yourself.
Hi, Dr. Daniel and Roberto. Thank you so much for having me. So I don't know if I have a good connection, so I do apologize, but I'm hoping that I'm stable now.
Yeah,
So,
great connection.
all right, awesome. So my name is Shondell Burney Speaks. As Dr. Munoz said, I am the senior advisor to the office of Mayor Jorge Alorza in the city of Providence. And my background is really community. I've been a community advocate for as long as I could remember. I am a certified life coach. I have been blessed to be able to be a TEDx Providence speaker. I am a workshop facilitator, a mom, a wife, and I think that's enough. Yeah.
Great. So yeah, thank you so much for being on the show with us. It would be great if you maybe Roberto, you've worked with Shondell and had the opportunity of really diving into some of these experiences with her. And if you'd like to maybe segue into one of the experiences that's kind of on the surface of your mind, Roberto, maybe we can kind of transition from there into learning some more about Shondell.
Absolutely. As all of our listeners know, because they hear us talk about it often, you and I have been serving on the equity committee, Dr. Munoz, for the state, and it has not been a pleasant experience. I've listened as my friend and co-host on this show has tried to bring science to that committee and has been mocked really early on. There are people in power for the state, particularly, who kind of pander, you know what I mean, almost pat you on the head, like that's cute, and have left me angry and probably raising my voice in that committee and wondering why I'm even there. And to be honest, I've used the words many times on this show that I feel like I'm a token on that committee. I feel like they're using me as their light-skinned Puerto Rican guy, right? Like they're digestible Latino on their equity committee just to have somebody sign off with an EZ on their name. And it's very frustrating. However, I've been pulling double duty because my longtime friend, even though it's passive and we are ships passing in the night, Shondell invited me to the African American Ambassadors Committee. And what I'm really curious about, I want to tell all of our listeners that the experience has been the polar opposite. My experience on that committee, I feel heard, and I feel like if there's something that I want to see changed in Providence, I feel like through this committee we can actually work together and get that done. And I wish that that's what was happening on the equity committee. So my question for you, Shondell, is because I associate this with you as your project, right? As one of your projects, like people seem to look to you like this is your jam. How did this happen? How did this occur? Where do you see it going? What's the highest of its potential? And like so many other questions, can you please tell us about the African American Ambassadors Committee?
Yes. So the African American Ambassador Group started back in May. Started back in either March or May, and just forgive me for not remembering exact dates. However, it happened right when we were hit with the COVID pandemic. There were some faith leaders in the community who came to us at the mayor's office, and they wanted to talk about how is the mayor or how is the city going to address how COVID was really affecting the marginalized and disenfranchised communities. COVID hit Providence very hard in the Black, African American, and Latino community, and they felt really helpless. So we had that one meeting. I believe we started off with about 25 people at the time. We had a national day of prayer that was established from that meeting. There was an executive order that was signed, a proclamation was done in reference to the National Day of Prayer. So from that day, the African American Ambassador Group grew. So it took on form from 25 faith leaders to over 160 community people, leaders, people of color, Black people, Indigenous people, white allies. Every week there are about maximum 80. I believe our worst day was 33, and that was because we had a Zoom link issue. So the African American Ambassador Call had grown. We have created about 8 now subgroups that have birthed from this initiative. Okay, so we with the things that were happening nationally, the social justice issues that have been taking place, the police brutality nationally, the equity issues nationally, people in Providence really wanted to bring to the forefront what is happening in Providence. What are we doing in Providence to unveil these issues and these truths? And they brought it to this forum, and that's just how the forum grew. We have the internal policy subcommittee that was birthed, the educational reform that is partnered with the state that was birthed. There are, like Roberto mentioned, there are people on both of these, on the equity committee as well as the African American Ambassador Group. We have the housing insecure and eviction defense. We have a police reform group. We have a mental wellness group, and we have the truth telling committee, and we also have youth voice. So there are community leaders that lead each one of these subgroups. We meet every week on Thursday via Zoom with the mayor. And each group also meets outside of the 10 o'clock Thursday morning group in their respective subgroups to talk about issues that the community is facing, and how do they, as a Black and brown community, like how do we help our brothers, our sisters? How do we help our neighbors? How do we help our fellow constituents? How do we keep the stakeholders engaged, and how do we keep the city and the administration like accountable, or how do we get them to help us in this type of work? And so with the administration, everyone is involved. Our staff has really taken on this project to really assist me in an amazing way. I wouldn't be able to do this work without them, but I will say that I thank you, Roberto, because I really pride myself on being a person of integrity and respect, and I'm big on building relationships with people and just really trying to be there for people. And I believe that my reputation, that reputation that I have, has been able to allowed me to do the work that I'm doing inside the African American Ambassador Group, and just really connecting folks together.
Shondell, what you're building is you're building community. So first, that group has grown, right? It's a large group, and nobody that I've noticed is trying to get paid. Like, nobody's self-invested. Everybody's invested in the community, and you've been building that community, even though they get paid, because everybody looks to you as big mama of that group. How many meetings have I been in where a different person was like, I don't know what you paying Shondell, but you need to pay Shondell more. Tell me you haven't seen that. I know you. I know you've seen it, right? But Dr. Munoz, Dr. Munoz, I feel bad because that equity committee should be. They got us together like Shondell did, and they put a team of community leaders together. And what they're doing, this committee, is they're allowing the community to actually lead. And that is my frustration with the equity committee, where they have us around to listen to their report outs once a week. And I'm disgusted by it, because what the hell am I there for? What am I wasting my time on that? One more thing I want to Shondell.
So Roberto, you're kind of cutting off.
I want to point out where the mayor, I saw my camera go out too. Like, I don't know what's happening. I'm going to slow down. How's this? Am I doing all right?
You're better now. You were cutting off there for a second.
Okay. All right, good.
So let me just, All right. So Roberto's having some technical difficulty, so we're gonna get back to Roberto. Yeah. So Shondell, you're seeing that's a little technical difficulties, right? So Roberto, what maybe yeah. So while we give Roberto just a few minutes, just to make sure that if anything can reduce the RAM consumption on his computer or something, we'll get to a quick question for you, Shondell. So so really, like I really appreciate all the background and what Roberto's saying. I mean, I think it's very true. I think the part of being a good leader is, empowering others, right, to really contribute their vision to a project and to allow them to execute on that vision, right, and to hold them accountable, but also to lift them up, right, especially in those moments where they're very successful in accomplishing that. And it really sounds like that's the environment and the culture that you've created, which is amazing. And just to draw the contrast and to validate some of the things that Roberto's saying, on the Equity Council, some of us are challenging the administration, and we push, and it's almost like needlessly having to push very hard to get not only clear answers, but to get them to even think about some of the questions. And on occasion, though, even though this isn't necessarily a great leadership style, we see some things bleed over into the press conferences. So recently, there was this talk, even though Roberto might recall, we were the ones pushing for coordinated operation teams within schools, K through 12. And there was a lot of pushback, but sure enough, what do they have? They have an entire operations unit now of coordinated teams. So we're willing to kind of be in the shadows if we have to, if that's what it takes. But I don't think that that's how you create or foster a culture that can persevere through the years, right? And so it's great to see that that's what you're creating as a foundation in Providence. Now, just to kind of dig in a little deeper around your leadership style, and especially in a time where there's a lot of things going on, as you mentioned, all at once. One of the I would say one of the recent challenges that we face even in Rhode Island as we face systemic racism, right? As we confront it together as communities, there are different approaches. There are different approaches. I would say we can sit back and talk about perspectives and definitions of justice, but generally speaking, the approach to achieve justice has also been different. We see that across the country. We see that here in Providence. And I did notice that at some point over the last month, you also very much kind of stood your ground as a community leader, and where we're holding your position in front of the Capitol about what you felt was the right approach in terms of achieving justice, of working together, of working with youth. And I thought it was a very powerful presentation that you had, speech. I don't know if it's in a formal speech. I don't want to say speech at first, but we can call it a speech. But like just it was a lot of passion, and I'm really like interested in getting your perspective. Like where do we go from here? And I know that question is pretty like stacked if we're talking about the country, but just like even as Providence, like where does Providence go from here and moving forward?
So honestly, I just really believe that as community leaders and as community people, it is really our obligation to challenge administrations. It is our obligation to do our due diligence and learn. A lot of people are unaware, so they're not learning on their own. And if there's not a platform to create situational awareness for people, they don't tend, not everyone, but there is a large number of people that won't go and find this information on their own. So for me, my vision of helping Providence move in a more forward-facing direction is to empower those who have a voice, and not just any voice, but a voice that people trust, a voice that is credible, and who can have these kind of conversations where, sometimes a white person isn't going to be able to tell us about us, and so it's like there are so many people that I know that are non-people of color who really know more about our history than we do, and it's sad. So I really think that Providence is definitely in a position to move um in a way that we actually can really create like a blueprint for other cities. I believe that the work that we're doing in this administration is not just for this administration. We have been really adamant that we want the work to be able to still be alive and be consistent after this administration leaves. And so we're not looking to do anything that is temporary. We're really looking to build a sense of permanency that can be taken on by the next administration. So I hope that I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Dr.
I certainly think, yeah, absolutely. And I think you speak to something that's like important for all of us, right? Like just understanding our history, not only the past, but even present, recently, right?
Mhm.
Contemporary. And so another question is, when I look at even Providence is really interesting overall, the administration, if you will, around it. You do see many more millennials, right? So that's one category. But when we talk about
Yeah.
like youth, and we're looking at the age range, 16 to 25, if you're going to consider below 25 young adults, how do you
Yeah.
feel about those generations? Do you feel like they're mobilizing around that messaging, or are they pulling away from it and seeking a more radical approach to change? And if the answer to the second question is you're seeing a trend towards the more radical side, how do you approach bringing them together with the vision you have?
Well, I see it as twofold. So there are a lot of young people who are already organizing, who are already doing policy work at very young ages, 16 to just graduating high school. And then we do see there's groups of young adults who are a little more radical. Um, I understand the radicalness. Like, I get it. I don't personally, this is just me, Shondell, this is not the administration or my job. This is me as a person. I don't agree with like the vandalism. I don't agree with a lot of that stuff. I don't. It's just me. I do understand that sometimes it takes a radical change to get your voice heard. I do understand that sometimes it really takes being loud, being consistent, being adamant, being driven in order to get your voice heard, because there has been so many years and decades and going on that people have been really quiet or felt silenced, or their voices are only raised when there's a tragedy. Now these young people, they're not stopping. They are marching, they're protesting, they're vandalizing. They want this country to wake up. What I would do in conversations that I've tried to have with some folks, first of all, I know that I'm not for everybody. So let me just make that very clear. My approach and the way that I talk to people is everyone is not going to feel like, oh, this girl, she's here for me. No, some people are like, like, I think you're a little you might live in a bubble, like you might be too nice, or whatever they feel about me. But at the end of the day, I understand that all people want to do is be heard. They want to be heard, they want to be seen, they want their presence felt. And if you can allow people to be heard, seen, and felt, you have already brought them into another level of life. And I think that some people make that a little more difficult. So for the radicals, I just try to get to know them. And I tell them off rip, like, I just want to get to know you. Let's build, tell me about yourself. And I feel like because they don't feel like anybody cares, then that's just the stuff that they do. It's like, who is taking time out of their busy schedules, out of their days to really listen to these youth, to take into accountability what they're saying, write it down, take some notes while you're talking to them, make them feel like they matter. And that's the problem. It's we as adults and we as ex gens, like, we're not making these young people feel like they matter. For the children and the young people who are already doing this policy work, and they're making the changes, and they're extremely positive, and they're deemed to be quote unquote very respectful. Those are the kids and those are the young people who everybody wants to have at the table. And I think that they feel like they can control those young people, but you can't control those young people either, because those young people are light years ahead of us. They're light years ahead of us. I just really feel like they were here before. I don't know what it is, but yeah.
Shondell talked about the importance of being able to challenge the administration. And that's what you opened up the show with, almost part of your introduction, right? Challenging the administrations. Mm-hmm. And I've watched Shondell even on thing, put her money where her mouth is, because we've got some young people who are brilliant agitators and disruptors right now. And that's what they should be doing. I need to make this clear, right? Like, yes, it is a pain in the ass to move forward, these conversations when you're being disrupted, but at the same time, like, it's almost their responsibility to be dissertating at this point, because it's not enough for them and greater change needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. Like, this is the closest we've ever gotten to an apocalypse. If not now, then when? So for these young people to really be speaking up, I'm watching Shondell, yes, maybe like take it. I'm also watching her welcome them into that same committee. The same people who are agitating her, and respectfully so, the same people who are agitating. I watch Shondell take a deep breath, because that group has been so important. And since that group has been so important, Shondell, I want to give you a chance to agree or disagree, but I also want to hear what has been the defining moment and what has been the moment that made your heart glow for this committee so far.
Whew, the moment that made my heart glow for the committee, I want to say, oh gosh, all right, maybe not one moment. Let me think for a second.
You can have 2 or 3. You got it.
Okay. So the defining moment for me, I really want to say, was in the beginning when we signed the executive order on Juneteenth, and that executive order was for I'm sorry, that in particular executive order was for the proposal to remove plantations from all city documents and swearing in ceremonies. So that for me made me feel like there was hope. Uh, I I am a big person that I have a lot of hope. I've been through a lot, and I still have this weird desire to push forth and create change and provide other people with hope. And so when that day happened, that to me was, all right, Shondell, like, we can do this. Like, as a community, we really can make the necessary change that has to be made, and we can buck up against the system, and we can challenge the system, and we can get the answers that we desire and that we want. I want to touch on the young people who come to bring challenges. uh I want to be very clear, like, I love young people. Whew. I love young people. I understand young people. And the thing for me with them is that even when they're challenging, I don't care. Like, be challenging, but come correct. Because if we have to correct you, I just need you to go do some homework. And that's the thing. Like, I want them to understand that when you challenge someone and when you're bringing ideas to the forefront, I want you to understand the difference of municipalities. Like, they have to understand the difference between what the state can do, what the city can do, what's federal. That's very important for their advocacy. And when they don't know these things, and when they're not challenged to learn and to get to know these things, that's when I have the problem. So it's those redirections to make sure that, yes, you have passion, you have fire, you need to be educated. We want you to come to the table knowing what it is that you're talking about. But then, Roberta, I'm big on respect, and I understand that disrespect it's visited me a couple of times on the calls. But yeah, it's really more along the lines of just wanting them to make sure that they're informed with the information that they're bringing to the table.
I mean, if the forums in the group, and it sounds like they are edifying to youth, I mean, I think that's an empowering thing. I mean, there are plenty of, environments that would find that one flaw in someone's argument and just write them off completely. So I think what you're doing is great. Um,
Mhm.
so I'm interested in knowing, are there other municipalities represented in terms of community leadership within this ambassador group?
Yes. So we are so lucky. We have people from all over Rhode Island who serve and work in Providence. We have people from Barrington. We have people from Cranston. We have people from Warwick. We have people, I'm trying to think. There's a couple of people from Barrington, but we definitely
So for
have a very diverse group.
So, like, for instance, do you have, and I guess I understand that it's like coming from Providence and who works there, but it seems like you're doing great like work in terms of advancing issues like policy issues that could be very important at the municipal level, but could also benefit municipalities that have many communities of color, right? So like Pawtucket has a huge Cape Verdean community. They have CACD, CVH, and so I'm just wondering whether there's room in the group as it grows to bring more of those community leaders in as well, or if they're already possibly in the group.
Mhm. Yeah, we definitely are welcoming people from all over. Um,
Awesome.
we want to be the model, honestly. That's the goal, is to be the model, to help people learn how to make change in their cities, and particularly in Rhode Island, and be the model across the board.
Awesome. Awesome. So
I
I'm
want to
looking
add
forward.
that
Maybe
I
we
feel
can.
like
Yeah.
this it's the kind of thing where anybody from it doesn't matter where, right? Like if somebody from
Mhm.
Pawtucket, somewhere else, somebody came in to this group and you could sell this group and say, hey, I think this idea, this would be the benefit. And if group, they will support to help you actually build that and have the city supporting that idea and pushing that idea forward. It really is the city working for the people, which I think,
Mhm.
again, it comes back down to Shondell. And it's just, and this is why I thought you were an important name. And I know Dr. Munoz agreed when we talked about it initially. We
Thank
both thought
you.
it was a really important name, and we wanted to hear this from you. So thank you.
Thank you so
Yeah. Yeah.
much. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, of course. Well, thank you so much for sharing the great work that you do. And my hope, because I also, I mean, Roberto and I may challenge the systems, but as you know, I mean, anyone involved with community advocacy and on any level, you need hope, right? I mean, or else
Mhm.
you get burnt out really fast. And so, at least with what I've learned today, my hope is that other communities and organizations within those communities that are looking, right, to build a coalition and a group like you have, I mean, would be great assets in terms of introducing them to this model, but also possibly if they can take something away from it and bring it to their municipality, that would be an amazing thing as well. Um,
Yeah.
so so now that we've touched on, I think we've really focused on youth, which is important, right? That we definitely wanted to start there, but we have a few more minutes, and I
Mhm.
really wanted to get your your this your perspective, a sense of what you're maybe feeling, thinking about the fact that we are still confronting COVID-19, right? And
Mhm.
from the medical side of things, uh, even for a moment displacing the federal level, which we know there were huge mistakes there, but even at the state level, it's been concerning how slow we move, and there are a lot of
Mhm.
promises about all the different specialized units that are going to mobilize within 4 hours, but that's not what we've seen, even in a time where the
Mhm.
case load is low. Um, and
Yeah.
and Providence, Central Falls, and Pawtucket, third in line, are really disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 from historical, evidence based on history for the most part. Observational evidence shows us that there could be a second wave,
Yeah.
and likely a result of just cold weather, the common cold, a lot of these things that lead to people presenting indoors more, sneezing possibly more, and so here we are. Do you have any concerns with where we are today in Providence? And if so, two sides of this. From an infrastructure standpoint, do you have concerns? And the other side of it is you really have a pulse on what just leadership across the spectrum of state and local, what they're how they're approaching this. So maybe if we can start with how you feel about the current infrastructure, and second, what you think we should be doing that we're not doing as much of. Love to
Mhm.
get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I definitely feel as though that there's being disproportionately impacted is an understatement. Personally, I feel as though we especially like being in Providence, because so the thing is, the poorer communities in places like Providence where there isn't a lot of space, right? So there's a lot of people. There are more people like on top of each other because we don't have as much land, and we're living in apartments. We're living in tenement houses. We're living in buildings. So we're closer together. It's easier for the disease to spread in that way because, talking personally, I feel as though that if the educational measures are not taken, or if people feel as though like they have to go to work if they're sick or not, whatever the case is, that it's just going to affect us, and it's going to affect our neighbors, and it's going to affect our economy. It's going to affect whether, we could put food on our table or what have you, because we are in such of close-knit quarters that there are people that are taking all of the precautions, washing their hands, sneezing in their elbow, doing everything that they need to do, disinfecting, sanitizing, and they're still getting COVID. And so there were some things that I was hearing about, like in regards to people not feeling as though they have the right mask. So that if they don't have the right PPE, they don't have access to the PPE. If they're not changing and discarding the PPE, then they're reusing things that aren't, they're no good. And that's another issue, right? And so I know for the cities, on the city's behalf, we have definitely provided masks to people. We've provided masks for rallies. So if anybody had a rally, like, come get these masks. Like, we know we don't want y'all gathering, but we don't want y'all passing spreading COVID-19 either. So it's kind of like a catch-22. The second part of your question, what could we be doing more of? Like, are you asking just like as a government overall in Rhode Island, or just as a people?
Yeah. So yeah, to be very specific, like what could we be doing more when you look at, like Providence, right? I mean, to be honest, I think what Providence could be doing more of, St. Paul's could probably be doing more of too, right? I mean, there's some similarities between the communities, but obviously you're coming at this from like having probably more significant insights in Providence. That was the focus of my question. So just to put some context behind it, there are things that we know,
Yeah.
right? We know schools are reopening. We know that our schools were falling apart before the pandemic. We know that there hasn't been a significant investment in infrastructure since the pandemic. So we know these realities, and I don't think that there's plenty of evidence and publications out there for people to read about it. But like that has taken a backseat, that should anything come to the front of the take a front seat in moving forward. And there's so many things to focus on. So for instance, just contextually, let me give you one example. A lot of us focus on schools opening, testing, COVID-19, and every now and then we get a dose of reality where Roberta will say, well, don't forget the youth. We have after school programs, right, that youth aren't been able to engage with, which is leading to mental health issues in our youth, and we're forgetting about them, and that's important. So that's what I'm really trying to get a sense of, right? Like, do you think that there's something that for some reason or other has not been enough of an emphasis, especially for the city of Providence, that we should be thinking about and moving forward, especially as we approach the fall?
Yeah, so there are a lot of moving parts here. The city of the city, we have a mental health task force, and in that task force, now this is outside of the African American Ambassadors Mental Wellness Subcommittee. So the mental health task force is really charged with partnering with different organizations and seeing how can we get their information out into the community, because we're not a provider, right? But we do understand that in this climate and in this time of COVID-19 and everything that we have going on, that there's an uptick in the mental health areas of life and issues, and depression is on the rise and all of these things. So we are definitely really trying to be cognizant of everything that's going on, and trying to create like awareness and finding out what organizations are up and running, alive and well, doing what, how could we bring you to the forefront? So we've been working on that, and I'm gonna be honest, like that hasn't really been like easy, because there are so many service providers, right? However, the service providers really don't want to take on intakes or new clients via Zoom. They These are things that they are so used to doing in person that it's challenging to say, like, even for a young person. I just want to give this example really quick. So for a young person to be, say if I uh referred a young person, maybe about 15, to a provider, they connect with this provider via Zoom. The provider is trying to do their job. However, their abuser or whatever is in the background. So there's really that lack of like safe space where we can't guarantee a lot of things. When it comes to the mental health providers, not the city, because we can't guarantee anything, but with those mental health providers. So that's where the struggle is. And I believe personally that with the things that I'm hearing and the things that I'm experiencing, that's where we're struggling with the mental health issues of our young people, of just our people in general, that everything is on the computer. So I might not be able to be honest to my mental health provider because I'm still scared. So there's that issue. um there's making sure that, I believe, like some organizations really need to do better with um designating like one person on your team to get all of the information of all the services that are happening in the city. Like United Way has a plethora of information. Get on their mailing list. Like some things are really easy and that we make a little more difficult because we're not used to doing this legwork, where now we have to take a little we got to be more diligent. What do we want to know? How do we want to help each other? um what do we really want to see change for just our family, or do we want to see change for the community? Because there's a difference. So if I only want to see change from my family, then there's not a lot of legwork that I really need to do because I'm taking care of this one household. But when I want to make change for an entire community and to create impact, then I have to do a little more work, and we are in a pandemic. So emotionally people are drained, mentally people are drained. So I just feel as though there's no right or wrong answer. We are just all in this struggle together.
I mean, thank you for highlighting that. I mean, I think it is an area that even before this pandemic, unfortunately, is constantly like overlooked. And
Yeah.
I do believe in mental health parity, right? I do believe that mental health should be equally funded when it comes to health insurance, and it should be equally funded when it comes to investments that we're making as the state and municipal government in terms of these programs. But I agree,
Mhm.
like everything else, you can apply coalition building in a grassroots way to coalition building even in business. It's a little harder in business because you have to prove that it's an adequate investment and just define investment from the perspective of the eye of the beholder, right? But I
Yeah.
agree 100%. And given that we're in a pandemic and doing a lot of this stuff remotely, it is more challenging. So maybe we can kind of put that forth and out there into the ether of our audience and listeners, and eager
Yeah.
to, if anyone has any thoughts. I know that we have health professionals that do listen to the show, and experts in various fields of the healthcare industry. Please feel free to reach out to Shondell and provide any suggestions and strategies that you might consider in terms of how to do this. I would say to expedite a lot of this, right? Because that's what it's always,
Mhm.
how quickly we get something that's workable and out into the community. So if you have those networks, if you have that expertise, and if you have both, please share your knowledge. And that's a request I'm making. So, Shonda, when we get to the end of the show, and I just want to say, it's been amazing having you on here. Really just bringing your perspective, your experience, what you represent, your leadership style, just all of that has really made this a great show. And I think Roberta would agree. And I'm grateful to Roberto for pointing out that you were leading the ambassadors group. We had a long late night talk about a week ago, and that was our focus. So when we do get to the end of the show, so now that I've said that, we like to, in the past, what we've done, and we call it our outrage, right? Like something that, outrage could be a strong word for depending on how you interpret it, but really what we're getting at is, what is it that's going to keep you up at night? That's going to, it's going to be your focus until you see something change. And we like to kind of leave the show with our audience understanding what that thing is for us, so that our audience can really either see a connection in what they're experiencing, what they're feeling and thinking, or possibly even just reflect on that question after the show. So would you like to start us off?
Sure. There are things that keep me up at night currently. And so I think something to leave you all with is the thing that really keeps me going is my heart's desire is to just make sure that there is adequate housing for people. The housing crisis is something that really keeps me awake at night. And so, yeah, I'm just hoping that we could find a way to house our people, house our homeless, and make safe houses for those who are in not so great situations.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Roberto, would you like to share yours?
I like to flip this into hope, right? Like what's keeping me up, but like where my hope is. And I've got to tell you, I had this really powerful moment 2 Novembers ago in an early screening of Into the Spider-Verse. And as a Puerto Rican, to see Spider-Man be half Puerto Rican and half Black on screen, when I am a lifelong Spider-Man fan, like I cried the first 7 times I watched the movie. How many since then? It's a thing.
Yes.
And I know that presentation and how it's a beacon of hope. Something that kind of crushed me this week. During the RNC convention last week, they had those 2 bandits from St. Louis who were, and what I like to remind people get really angry at protesters, and some people who are here in Rhode Island running as Democrats, protesters as rioters, as if the 2 terms are synonymous. They're a grieving community. These are our children. This is our community who's grieving and in the streets. It's not because they don't got nothing better to do. So they had guns pointed at them, and people who were pointing those guns were celebrated at the RN, validated guns out. And the very next day, somebody who we know was watching because was at previous Trump events. And this is somebody who's definitely watching that message from these 2 gun-toting lunatics. Went out and murdered in the street during a protest. Who are these people? These are our community who are already heard how they're actually being hunted, and we have politicians who are endorsing. That is enough to keep me up at night. That's enough to make me sick. And when I watch even simple things like the term response to Black Lives Matter, it's mentalized to, in the words, Black Lives Matter. So all together at once, and I'm thinking back again at Spider-Man. And who is that message for the students who I brought 2 different times, over 100 Steambox students, to go see a movie, The Black Panther. And The Black Panther, that beacon of hope for a community. And I don't want to oversimplify. He's not coming from a grass. he was still so important. And I think that death was just really disheartening, because we almost need a Black Panther right now. We need that beacon of hope. And it was just another, like, it was another strike. I know this wasn't at the hands of police. I know, somebody that was choked out, but it was just anything 2020. Like, can we have anything? You know what I mean? Can I have like one thing before I go to bed on Friday night? Can I have like one joy, or does 2020 just want to suck everything away? And by the way, the responsibility of blaming everything on 2020, I say in lightness, right? Like lighthearted, but we all know that this systemic oppression that's actually struggling and choking the life out of all of these things. When we look at the state of our country, our atmosphere, right? The global warming, all of that stuff, all of these things are designed with intent. And it's really sad. And the community is struggling. And I just wish I could still have the Black Panther. You know what I mean? Like that, like that one round stupid, but it really it really messed me up on Friday night. It's not about Chadwick Boseman. It's about what Chadwick did to the masses.
Right.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Roberto. So just to kind of take off from that, I do want to lift Chadwick Boseman's name out there. I do think it just as an individual, his story was one of courage, and someone who continues to think positive even in a time where he was fighting for his life. And I think that courage, as in anything in life, when it pours into your work. And I think it's not. So I think there is something about the man that did pour into the character, and that was reflected out into the world and for youth. And one of the images that not so much came to mind, but was reflected in the TV when they were honoring Chadwick Boseman for his career, was this kid, maybe 4 or 5, lined up his action figures, and all of them raised their hands up around the Black Panther. And the reason I'm pointing that out is, I think we too often we forget that kids, even younger children, they take things, personal, right? They feel the loss just as much as an adult is, even if they don't completely understand the loss or why, let's say, he died, to be very specific. And what keeps me up at night is the reopening of schools. And so here's the connection that I'm trying to say, because it is about the future, it is about youth. And I think because of the impact of COVID-19 on children, which from statistical standpoint, the risk had been very low, even though this is going to be the first time that we unleash children in an environment that it could be very contagious. But even then, even basically with the assumption that children will not get very sick, at least statistically, not many children will. What if they spread it to their family members and their family members die? Why do we assume that just because they're not getting sick, there won't be a consequence to their bringing that disease home that can then kill their families, right? We're talking about a level of trauma that could exist and could be really generational trauma within our communities if those things do happen. So overall, in terms of like this experience, this beacon of hope that was lost this past week, and moving forward into the fall, I want to make sure that our children are able to preserve the hope that they have at home too, right? The role models they have at home, the parents they have at home, the people they look up to in their communities. And so that's really what's keeping me up at night, right? This idea that that we often dismiss the realities that youth probably feel more than we feel. They're probably way more empathetic and less jaded about life than we currently are, right? As a result of the many experiences we had. So in moving forward, just my hope is that as a community, we can just continue to reflect on this, continue to reflect on youth, on ways that we can support them. And if anything, try to lessen the burdens that they'll carry in the coming months, possibly, as well as in the coming years. So with that, I also want to again thank Mrs. Shondell Bernie Speaks for
Thank you.
giving us this time today. And my hope is that you'll come back on the show and maybe talk more about how the program's evolved and some additional things in the future. And so again, thank you so much. Roberto, thank you. You've been a great co-host as always, and looking forward to reconnecting. And with that, welcome back, or I would say come back to Pump Up the Volume, where we'll be amplifying voices of communities and really presenting you with insights that we believe you should know and questions that perhaps you can reflect on. So have a great evening, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you.